Rock and roll ain't noise pollution. Hey, welcome back. Good to see you. Um, let's talk about music for a change. Um, so I saw the passing of one of your music heroes, Sly from Sly and the Family Stone.
I thought you were talking about the keyboardist of Warrant.
No, well, although we can certainly get to him soon. But I think I was reading something Dylan was talking about, and I don't know how long ago the interview was. I think it was years ago. But he's talking about when the Beatles came out, and he's saying how everyone thought like the Beatles were fun and they were pop and all. And he said he could tell. He said that they had something different. He said their chord changes. He said were really good, really unusual. He said he knew they'd stay in power. He said you couldn't admit that you liked the Beatles if you were someone like Dylan, but he could tell that they were there for good. And I think bands like the Beatles and bands like Sly and the Family Stone are important, not just in their own right, but if it wasn't for the Beatles, there wouldn't have been so many other bands. If it wasn't for Dylan, if it wasn't for Sly, you know, we live in a we still live in a country full of racism, and certainly back in the 60s is absolutely like that. And I think that that's why Sly was so groundbreaking, and in a way much like the Velvet Underground are more important in a lot of ways for what they influenced than what they actually did themselves. I see Sly a lot the same way.
So, for our listener who may not be aware of what you're talking about, um, that's because Sly and the Family Stone were they had white people and black people in their band,
And men and women.
and men and women. And to your point, yeah, that certainly was rare back then for sure. To have that sort of lineup in 1965 when they started. Yeah, totally a groundbreaker, a rule changer. And also to your point, so one of the things that I've been wanting to talk about for our last couple sessions was that recent Sly Stone documentary, and for whatever reason we never got to it. And have you seen it, by the way?
I've not, and I've got it bookmarked. It's on my watch list.
Okay.
Once without even having seen it, and I do want you to go on, but without having even seen it, I'm glad he got his moment in the sun before passing away.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
many times the guy dies, and then now,
Yes.
so
Well, and not to give away too much of it, but he's not really featured in it
okay.
throughout the whole thing, as far as like contemporary interviews with him or footage or anything, except for the very end. And it's pretty clear why he couldn't participate. I mean, his mind, and this goes back to personal appearances he made, like on the Grammys, 15 years ago or whenever that was, where he shows up on some award show and you can just tell his brain is fried.
Yeah.
He's not really able to um, put together a coherent sentence, and I mean he's really fried, and now even more so, or at least in this little clip where he shows up at the end of Questlove's documentary. Uh, but yeah, I mean, and you do see that, and he's not long for the world. I mean, he was getting up there. I think he's one of those uh, music stars from that era that lasted much longer than people expected
Yeah.
because of his past. One thing I was going to say though, to your point about how influential he was and that band was, the thing that really struck me in that movie, there's this great. It's so good, by the way. It's. I know I say this every fucking time I see some great new music documentary. I say, "Oh, it's one of the best ever." This truly is. I mean, it is really good because you don't see a lot of great footage of Sly and the Family Stone. Not a ton. Not
Right.
like a band like the Beatles
Right.
or the Stones or whatever, the Who even. Um, and it does some real deep dives. Like for example, their very first record was called A Whole New Thing, and it came out in '66. And there's a lot of footage of them recording that record. So a lot of footage of them in the studio. And this is before they'd ever had a hit. There was no hits on this record, and they were basically an unknown entity. and it's so clear. I mean, they were doing the hard funk sound that James Brown later started doing a couple years after them. Um, they were doing it before he was, and it's very clear when watching this footage and by listening to the record. It might be my favorite Sly and the Family Stone record, but like I said, there's no hits on it. Nobody knows it. Nobody has it. It wasn't until their next record that had a couple hits that they became, the big top 40 band. But anyway, if you haven't seen it, it's worth your while, and not just because he died. That's just a coincidence.
No,
But
we talked about it before. Yeah.
had we mentioned
Yeah,
it before?
you had mentioned it, yeah. So
Okay, I
because
couldn't remember if I did or not. But man, it's good. But yeah, super super sorry to hear about Sly's passing. Um,
he's he's one of those
a
ones where,
great one.
as you know, as we've discussed, I inherited a lot of my older brother's records, and along with it, a lot of his musical taste as well early on. And Sly was one of the bands that he was into, way before a lot of white people were digging Sly.
Uh-huh.
So so
And even again, going back to lesser known Sly records, after he self-destructed more or less after the record there's a riot going on. At that point he was basically making that record by himself, holed up in his mansion in Los Angeles, just coked out of his mind for days on end, and nobody could deal with him. He couldn't deal with anyone, and that was essentially a solo record. And but coincidentally, one of I think the first top 40 hit that used a drum machine was the song Family Affair. So again, another piece of evidence of why he was so ahead of his time. Um, because the drummer at the Sly and the Family Stone, Greg Errico, had had enough at that point, and wasn't he? I think he plays on two songs on that record, and he just wasn't dealing with Sly. But what I was going to say is, even the lesser records after he stopped calling it Sly and the Family Stone, it was just Sly Stone. Even those records are actually pretty darn good when he was completely, his brain was fried at that point. But there's always some sort of little gem on every one of those records. And he released records up until the very early 80s. And not many people know them or have them, but even those are worthwhile, in my opinion, worth listening to.
it's interesting when among all artists, like how much effect drugs had, and like we talk about like who did last and who didn't last, and the fact that like for like speaking of like being coked out, that Bowie was able to do Station to Station, which is my favorite album of his, and
Hmm.
he was completely gone on coke at the time, or that Clapton almost retired in the early 70s because of his heroin addiction.
Hmm.
If it wasn't for Pete Townsend helping pull him out of it, we wouldn't have had a lot of the later, Clapton records. And it must be hard, and Miles Davis and, so many of the jazz players and all, Charlie Parker and all. It must be hard when you're at that level of adulation. It must be hard when you're also just like killing time before a show, after show, on the road. It'd be so easy to succumb to the power of drugs and alcohol.
So a lot of them do claim that it's the boredom with having, and which is caused by having too much free time on their hands, that take them down that path, for sure. But let me ask you this. So yeah, okay, sure, it would be tough to be a insanely successful music superstar and have a drug addiction, but what about if you're just like, I don't know, an accountant or a
Yeah.
garbage man?
No,
I think those guys, if they would you be able to, would Miles Davis be able to successfully deliver the mail if he was, high on heroin all
uh,
day?
that's why I always wanted to be a mailman in San Diego and just get high and just like walk around my little mailman shorts and just deliver mail all day, listen to my headphones. I thought that was the
So,
best job ever.
so
So
That, yeah, that would be bad. I had jobs where I was high all day. I will admit it in my younger years, several, in fact, and it was just because it was the type of work it was, where
Not
you could be high and not fuck things up and not kill yourself, not hurt anyone. It just helped with the monotony of that type of dead end job. And that's why I have trouble. I certainly have no sympathy for anyone in that arena who developed a drug problem. To me, it's like, wah, go cry to somebody else. I have no sympathy for you. You've got such
wow.
a,
That's a harsh.
well, you've got such a stellar life if you're looking at it from the outside, and you're pretty you've got things pretty good if you're a Pete Townsend, let's just say, and he developed a heroin addiction later on, like in
Yeah,
the early 80s.
yeah.
Um, and I just, you are living in such rarefied air as a successful musician, adored by the whole world and super wealthy because of the art you're doing. I don't have much sympathy for somebody like that. I have more sympathy for the guy who's, living a life of drudgery and a dead end job. And to me, that makes more sense to go down that drug addiction path because of that drudgery.
Addiction is addiction, and it can
Sure.
happen to anyone. And I would say be careful to assume, like just because someone is successful or someone's rich or whatever, doesn't mean they're happy. I
Well,
certainly don't
clearly,
think, I don't think,
clearly.
I don't think Keith Moon was a very happy guy, you know,
Um,
and I think a lot of that behavior was trying to, like we gotta have fun all
make
the
up.
time. Yeah,
He
and
was like the sad clown.
yeah, and and I do think I think being a very successful musician or athlete, it must be tough when you get home in between, and try to be a normal person, as I discussed last time, that bands who
Uh-huh.
like would rent a house and for 2 weeks and like do their own dishes and shit like that. And I think certainly when the music ends, like, and that's the difference with musicians. So you see Dylan, he's out there on the road. What is he in his 80s? So
Yeah.
but with athletes, when it ends before you're ready for it to end, and you're used to, like, people screaming when you're, scoring a goal, hitting a home run or whatever, and then suddenly it's all over. It must be hard.
But
And
those guys, their career ends oftentimes in their early to mid 30s.
yeah, very early.
So
Yeah.
so when I get that a little bit more, and I have a little more sympathy for those people who fall into some sort of addiction, but most of the musicians we're talking about, their careers don't really ever end until they die for the
Yeah.
most part.
It-
So they're not suddenly
yeah.
necessarily missing out on the rush of success, like, say, I don't know, a Major League Baseball player who has to retire at 35.
Right. And I think it's different reasons for different people. I agree with that. But I think, like going back to like Miles Davis and Charlie Parker and guys like that, I think that for them, a lot of it was living in a world with separate water fountains and separate bathrooms, and not being able to eat or sleep at a hotel or restaurant you wanted to eat at. I could certainly see turning to drugs to deal with that sort of thing.
Uh, uh,
Yeah.
and you're right. I mean, I should not just assume um, that I know about the inner workings of anyone who's going through that sort of thing. But just from the point of view of being a big fan and idolizing a lot of these whack jobs,
Yeah.
it just, it's hard to feel too much sympathy or empathy.
Well, it's why, like, in my own way, like whenever like people are like, oh, it's so sad this guy died. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's no more sad that he died than this other person died. Now, unless like they die young, like some sort of thing like that, and especially if it's, I don't know, a car accident or whatever, like, Eddie Cochran, as opposed to drug overdose. It's too bad Jimi Hendrix died, but it's certainly not something like I would have lost sleep over, or Jim Morrison, or Janis Joplin, people who are courting death. Amy Winehouse, as we've talked before. It wasn't a question of if; it was a question of when, as opposed to John Lennon.
right.
So those are
Tho-
different
Those were
circumstances.
based on lifestyle choices
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
it's like, okay, well, you make that choice, and like that, that's more likely what's going to happen.
What,
But
what,
but also, but
go
people
ahead.
also, I was going to say,
Uh,
people also react to when a celebrity dies, they react as if they knew that person,
mhm.
and it's just really strange to me. So
It's kind of like when you're rooting for a team and you say, "Oh, we won." And when you're rooting for a pro team
yeah,
and you say, "Oh, we didn't play very well," when you're not on the team, or
oh yeah,
we
but
should have
using the
played
term
better.
"we," yeah, no,
Yeah,
and I certainly use the term "we."
I know you do, and
Yeah,
that
I
always
always
cracks
do.
me up.
Yeah.
And I get that it's I mean that's just that's symptomatic of your passion for your teams,
Well,
and I get it, but I can't help but kind of laugh about it too.
what if I don't call my team we, what can I call the other team? I can't call them they,
Oh, you could
unless
say
everyone is they.
oh, the Bruins
Yeah, yeah,
or the Maple Leafs.
yeah. Now it's funny though, because as you know, I used to bet on sports. Okay, and in that case, I
Speaking of
never.
addictions,
Yes, and that's one of the things that it happens. So I know about addictions firsthand.
yeah.
But like when I bet on teams, I never said we. There's not that connection there.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
Only when you're talking about it from the point of view of just a fan.
Yes.
Okay. Because
Yeah.
yeah, I do notice you saying that to this day. I notice you saying that a lot, but it's never around gambling since,
No, and
obviously you don't
so
gamble anymore.
yeah, and so let's say I bet on the Oilers or the Panthers or whatever the other night last night, and I wouldn't say, oh, and we won. I was like, great, they won. I cashed, my bet or whatever. Like, there's no connection there. There the way there is to a home team, or not even a home team, but a team that you root for. So, and that's the strange thing about, like, I was watching the French Open over the weekend, and
Uh-huh.
men's tennis has never been better. God, are these guys incredible players? But it's always funny for me watching them because it's hard for me to watch a sport when I don't have a rooting interest. That's one of the reasons I used to gamble. Okay, because I love watching sports, but I can't watch. I haven't been watching the Panthers or the Oilers because I don't care. Okay, and it's hard for me to watch tennis because that often because I don't really. I've got to really choose, like, who am I rooting for, and I got to have an idea in my mind of why I'm rooting for this person, and it's why I don't watch golf. I don't care who wins and loses, as opposed to
Mhm.
the Red Sox or the Bruins or the Celtics or whatever, where it's very easy for me to say, okay, that's my team, that's us.
That
You know.
and I get that. But speaking of the French Open, like I'm not even sure how you could watch it at all because like do you even know any of the players
Oh
at this
yeah,
point?
yep, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. No, because I watch the majors.
you do watch them still to this day.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
I don't, like, if I miss it, I miss it. It's not like I would never miss a Celtics, NBA championship game ever. Like, unless, whatever. But I don't care that much about tennis that way. But when it's on and I can see it, men's tennis, in both
Uh-huh.
men's and women's tennis, I watch. So I watched Coco Gauff on Saturday before I had to start work. And then I taped the Alcaraz Sinner game on Sunday. And unfortunately, they've not figured out that just because you bookmark 3 hours for a tennis match doesn't mean it's going to end in 3 hours. So I'm watching it and it cuts off
Oh yeah.
halfway through. So I missed, it turned out to be an incredible 5 set match and I missed half of it, which really annoyed me.
Yeah,
But
you got to set that for the whatever show is on
yeah,
afterwards. You got to
it's
include that.
that was a rookie mistake. But growing up, I used to play tennis not well at all. And my mom liked tennis and all. So I watched, McEnroe Borg, back in the day and loved watching that stuff. And so I've always been a tennis fan, just not a, diehard tennis fan the way I'm a football fan. So, and I'll watch
And
soccer when it's the World Cup,
mhm.
you
Well,
know.
you're a sports fan in
Yeah.
general, and
And if you're a sports fan in general, then you know who these people are. So I know a bunch of golfers. I know I could name 15 golfers right off the top of my head.
okay,
And I
start
don't want you to
now.
go.
Now.
Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, Tiger Woods, and also I'll see stuff. So like Phil Mickelson made this incredible shot from the bunker the other day. I don't know if you saw that, but it's
Nope.
because I watch ESPN. So, oh, like, and they'll go and they'll show it. And so stuff like just creeps in your head that you can't even avoid, you know.
Um,
It's sort of like
which
listening to AM radio.
uh, in much the same way that we or I bemoan um, the passing of certain eras, whether it be music or whatever, cultural things in general. There, for me, there was a real sweet spot in tennis, some in the same era you were referring to, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was real characters. We're talking Borg, we're talking McEnroe, Yvonne Lendl, Vitas Gerulaitis, what was the guy? Guillermo Vilas, Eli Nastasi. When all of those guys were like rock stars, and they had these huge personalities and these great legendary clashes in the majors. And ever since then, whether it was McEnroe and Borg in that famous Wimbledon, I think it was 1980, or McEnroe and Lendl in the 82 French Open, where McEnroe was up by 2 sets, just killing him, and Lendl comes back and wins the next 3 sets. So I haven't been able to really, and I like tennis, I like playing it, and I like watching it, but I haven't been able to get into it as a fan since that era. And I don't know if it's the change in the main dominant figures in the sport and their lack of personality, and it just seems like everything's just sort of more sterile and corporate, or if it's just me, just I aged out of it and just stopped being interested, or a combo of the two.
Yeah, it's probably a combination. Because certainly, Federer and Rafael Nadal recently retired. Djokovic is still playing, but he's going to retire within the next year. And they were the big three of men's tennis, and they were incredible tennis for the last, 15,
And
20 years.
and I get that, and I know that, and I know like they're the best players ever,
Yeah.
really. But there was something about it that I was just never drawn to. It's like, oh yeah, it's the two of those three in the final of Wimbledon again, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't captivating to me enough to spend the time to watch it and be a fan. Whereas back in the day, with in particular McEnroe, fuck, I would watch any match he played in that I could watch because he was so compelling.
And I'd say to also a couple other things. One is there's so much going on now. There's so many different options. You've got to actually choose to watch
Yeah,
that.
that's
And back
yeah.
then, back then it was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to see this tennis match between these two incredible players. And it wasn't like, well, what else is on, or what else could I be doing, or and so I think that's a large part of it.
Yeah,
Um,
it probably is. It probably is much like when you'll hear somebody talking about how there's no particular thing on TV anymore that would guarantee, other than maybe the Super Bowl, that would guarantee the whole country was watching it. Like, say, the last episode of MASH is the example always thrown out there. It's like, oh, like, three-quarters of the television sets in the United States were on watching the final episode of MASH,
yeah.
and it's because of what you're saying, the same thing. It's like, well, now, yeah, you don't get that for anything because of streaming. There's no reason to watch anything when it's actually on. And instead of like three channels with one episode of MASH being on one of them, there's like 500 channels.
If you went to watch the French Open, it would have taken you 5 or 10 minutes to even figure out what network it was on,
I bet.
as
Yeah.
opposed to. But yeah, the last show they call it appointment TV, and the last show that they refer like the is referred to as appointment TV, where people sat down to watch it when it was happening as opposed to taping it, was Game of Thrones. And even then, it wouldn't have captured that large of a number.
No.
The most popular TV show for the past, I think, 20 years, 30 years is Sunday Night Football. And it kills the ratings, like just kills it. So but sports is different. I do tape stuff occasionally, like try to tape the French Open, but I really, really prefer not to. I really prefer watching it live. And so
I know a few people like you, a few friends who are they do struggle watching something that's taped
yeah,
for whatever reason. They just knowing that it's not happening while they're watching it, and I
yeah.
assume that's the reason that it bothers you. It's sort of almost like an OCD thing. you know?
Yeah, and it's like like I could, oh, I could just fast forward to the end or whatever, but I don't want
Uh,
to. Like I want to
uh,
enjoy it, And it's I don't mind. Like if I'm watching a show, never a problem. If I'm watching even a live concert, I'm okay with stopping it to grab a beer or take a piss, whatever. But yeah, it's weird with sports where it's a live event and I want to see it live. You know,
yeah, I get that. I
you'd
never
have to
do
be
it.
a real sports fan to. I mean, like a crazy sports fan
Well,
to because
there's
you
some.
tape the hockey games and you don't mind that.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And like the Masters, I
Oh, you
none of
did
that
that?
stuff. I don't tape it. I can't
Okay.
tape anything now.
Okay.
I will stream something if something's available with streaming. I will watch it that way so I can fast forward through commercials, of course. I just find them so repulsive and so insulting to my intelligence. I cannot sit through them at all if I can help it. And if I'm watching something where you can't fast forward, I will just turn down the sound and like
Yeah.
pick up a magazine or
Yeah.
something
I just mute it and
for
leave the room. Yeah.
3 minutes. Yeah.
But they're gonna
Um,
figure out a way someday where handcuffs like come over your hands and like hold you in your chair and you can't even touch the remote.
it'll be like what they did
Clockwork
to
Orange.
Alex in Clockwork
Yeah.
Orange. Yeah, they
Yeah.
will pin your
Yeah.
eyelids open.
Yeah.
It's coming to that. I
Yeah.
mean, the corporations are doing whatever they can to make sure that you can't look away from their advertising. And case in point, all the advertising that is built into the fabric of an actual event,
Yeah.
sporting event.
My brother's idea is that you spend 1 week a year where you go to some like room and they make you watch commercials all day from 8 to 5 for 1 week entirely, but then you're done. You don't have to watch commercials the rest of the year.
That's a good idea. That's what it's come to. Like
So
people would prefer that
yeah.
over the model that is basically in place now. That's too funny.
One of the reasons that I go to the theater I go to, it's the one that Kim and I took you to for the Pulp Fiction quote along, the Alamo Theater, is because
Yeah,
they don't show commercials.
yeah,
So
yeah.
and they're really serious about talking and texting. If you do, they kick you right out. So
And that's great because that is the bane of movie going these days, or anything in
yeah,
life. It's just
it's amazing when I'm
bad.
watching. I'll be watching like an NBA Finals game, okay, and people are sitting courtside. That means those seats are like
Yeah,
thousands of
and
dollars.
they're doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah, it's crazy.
I would like to put those people in front of a firing squad.
I mean, and if you're doing it at a hockey game, like a baseball game, I still don't like it, but at a baseball game, at least okay, the action's a little slow. At a hockey game, like, what are you crazy? More people at a concert filming the concert, instead
Yeah,
of enjoying the music.
yeah.
I think cell phones are the greatest and the worst invention ever at the same time.
They're rewiring everybody's brain.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Younger people in particular
Oh
who have
yeah.
grown up knowing nothing back but that. In particular, young women. Uh, it's I see it in every facet of life, but coming out of hot yoga class in particular, I just feel I feel what is going on in these younger people's minds. As soon as they get out of class,
Yeah.
they're all like scrambling to go
Yeah.
to where their phone is and get their phone and do this
Yeah.
to check. And it's not to check anything important, but
No,
it's all about their social
I was
media.
disconnected. Yeah.
Who liked me, who didn't like me, who said this about me, who left this comment, and it's this frenzy, and it's just it blows my mind how rewired their minds are by this. This is after being in a 1 hour long class,
Yeah.
and they're literally like everybody there's not even any like chit chat or anything after class.
Yeah.
It's just, and people are walking out, they're walking like this, and they're
Yeah.
walking into each other.
Yeah.
They're, walking into doors. And
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I
Yeah.
see it 4 or 5 times a week. And um, it amazes me and disgusts me at the same time.
It,
It
it,
really bothers me.
it's really interesting because, like I said, it's also in certain cases the greatest invention. I love having a cell phone. Like my brother, I remember telling a story about a friend of his who had quit his job and started his own business. This is like 50 years ago, a long, long time ago. And my
Hmm.
brother said, it must be great. You have all this free time. He said, no, I'm always at home. I'm tethered to the phone because I don't want to miss any business
Hmm.
because his phone was at home,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
But
so,
let me ask you this.
yeah,
Would you prefer to go back to the old model, to the to the world pre-cell phone. If we go back to say 1985, pre-cell phone, pre-internet, all of that, and that, and along with that came everything else in this arena that we're talking about. Would you prefer to go back to that and not have what we have now and everything that comes with that, what we have now?
No, because of my business.
So,
Because like I can be at the park with the dogs, and if someone emails or may text me, like I can get it and I can respond. In particular, also people often text me they're running late. If they couldn't do that, it'd be annoying.
so my follow-up to that is there were sure a lot of businesses doing just fine
Yep, yep.
uh,
But you can't put
without that.
you can't put the toothpaste back into the tube.
But if we were to go back to that,
Yeah.
it would be not like we got to where we are now and then headed back. It would just be like things stayed the same. Let's just
I,
put it that way. So we
no,
never would have known about cell phones and social media and all that bullshit.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
As much as I find, those sort of people annoying, when I'm trying to drive through the supermarket, like so I can park, and people are like walking, like and looking at their cell phones, and I feel like just sort of running them down. As much as I feel the same way you do, a lot of the times, I still, they're not me. I don't have to deal with them. Like it still makes my life much more convenient. And I only use my phone for email, for text, and for photos.
Mhm.
Like my sister's one of those people who's like, plays games on her phone, reads the news on the phone, like everything's through her phone. Like for
Mhm.
me, I want the largest screen possible. The idea of like,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. The screens, and this is part of just being an old fucker, but
yeah, yeah,
the screens are too small to
yeah,
watch anything. People will send me links to videos and what
yeah.
have you,
I
and
never watch those on a phone ever.
I will forward it to my email and then I'll watch it on a computer, which is still too small, but it's not as bad as trying to watch something on a cell phone.
As we're doing this, you're on a 45-inch screen.
Oh,
So
that's what you're watching it on.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah, you're just on my I'm watching you on my laptop
yeah.
screen.
And so
So,
even that is like, so if I find that too small, they give a cell phone,
so
plus I've got Fred Flintstone thumbs. They do not work like this,
yeah,
So I used
that
to, and
must
it's
be scary having me a big screen in your room.
what
That's kind of
you're,
fucked up. I didn't know that.
yeah, you're the reason I don't have a 110-inch one. But no, I like everything as big as possible, and also so even when like when I'm on the road, and I bring my laptop, I'm always like, oh yeah, that's right, the screen is way smaller than I'm used to dealing with. So I want, and I just don't understand when people watch a movie on their phone. I'm like, what are you crazy? Like it's just so bizarre to me. So,
Agreed.
but also I will say if I was like now, let's say 15 years old or 20 years old, so I've grown up
Mhm.
like that, maybe I'd feel differently. I don't know.
It's one of the things that uh, as a culture or society we've lost is caring about film as an art form, whereas you need
Well,
a certain size of a screen to really be able to appreciate the vision of the director or the filmmaker, I think.
yeah,
And that's lost on younger kids
yeah,
because it's never really been around um, like it was when we were growing up, where, you had to see it in a theater, in
yeah,
fact, and on a really big screen. And it's much in the same way. It's the same sort of thing with music.
yeah.
Younger people, by and large, in general, didn't grow up hearing music on a high fidelity system that actually does justice to the music and um, allows
And
people to hear it with a certain level of fidelity intended by the musician, as
intended. That's
opposed
what I was
to,
gonna say. Yeah, intended.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and it's exactly the same sort of thing. It's like, well, if you don't know what you're missing, then that's how it
yeah,
happens. They didn't know they were missing that, and you do hear a lot of younger people who are now getting into vinyl, using that as the example. It's like now when they're actually presented with it on a good system, and then it dawns on them. They get to a certain age and like, oh my God,
yeah.
yeah, actually, this really does sound good, and it is a different experience. than walking around streaming something on earbuds
Yeah.
while, going through 5 seconds of a song. Oh, I don't like that. I'm going to
Uh,
go 5 seconds to the next song for 10
uh,
seconds. I don't like that. I'm going to skip around. And when they're actually confronted with an old school experience that we grew up with,
yeah.
they kind of get it. It seems like some of them anyway.
Some,
That's why
yeah.
vinyl has had this resurgence over the last few years.
But it's definitely like, yeah, I like, nowadays, if I watch a movie at home, I'm watching it on a big ass TV. I've got surround sound. It's really nice. When I remember though going to see Star Wars when it first came out, when I was 14 or 15 or whatever it was, and like, oh my God, seeing it in the theater, like compared to the TV we had at home, like in the
Sure.
sound we had at home, I was like, oh, this is incredible. And it made it quite an experience. Much like cell phones, the greatest and worst invention, I think the internet in general the cool thing about like traveling back in the day was like, let's say you went to like, I don't know, Iceland and you found like some really cool little thing in some shop out of nowhere. Like I can get the same thing now, like just going online, but it's good in some ways and it's terrible in other ways.
Oh, it's so there's so many pros and so many cons.
Yeah,
I think there's more cons
I wouldn't get to see your pretty
myself.
face right now if it wasn't for the internet.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And
Larger than life.
both of our listeners would be shut out of this scintillating
How'd they
conversation.
get by? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is one of the pros, and the biggest pro, of course. No, I think
The,
it's done more harm than good. I do. Just
the,
simply because it's stripping the humanity out of humans. I think it's largely responsible
I
for
think it's
that.
all, but no, because I think it's also made people closer. I'm still in touch with some of the girls I dated back in school because of Facebook. Like,
Well,
because of social media, I'm able to be in touch with people I would otherwise never been able to keep in touch with.
lucky them.
Yeah. So it's a gift from God. And I'll tell you one thing, man, because of my sense of direction, if I didn't have GPS, like a an app like Waze, like that is
But
critical.
but still, I have to. And you're talking to Human Map here, by the way. That was one of my nicknames as a kid. We'd be
And
out you know, getting stoned, driving out around out in the country in the wilds of Walla Walla, and I would always be the one who knew exactly where we needed to go to get back home or wherever we were going. Hence the nickname Human Map. And a couple of my friends to this day still refer to me as HM because of that. But my point
we were the
is,
family traveling across country where we'd have to pull over frequently, take
and
the
look at
map from
a map.
AAA, spread
Uh-huh.
it out over the hood of the hot car, okay, and try to figure out what the fuck, like where we were and where we're going and how did we end up here.
In the middle of the Mojave Desert.
Yeah, exactly.
The hills have eyes.
Yeah,
Mutants are like peering
yeah,
at you
yeah.
from a half a mile away,
Yeah.
ready to pounce.
And they're
But
saying they're too stupid to even bother what they're saying about us.
they won't taste good.
Yeah.
But still, look how close that brought you together as a family.
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
I still,
how to get people at each other's throats.
um, still though, yeah, all that shit is easier, and getting information at our fingertips like that for everything, which is about to become, ramped up even, by 100 with AI. I still, I still think there's more cons and pros. When you look at what it's done to us and how it's rewired us and how we relate to one another, that's my thing. Because we did get by without maps. We did get by without the
Well,
internet.
you got by without a map.
Yeah, everybody did though. You survived. You survived without a cell phone. We
It was
all
close
did.
at times. But so how would you have known about the Tinder Six show in Chicago? Would you have
Yes.
known? Okay, would you have been able to get tickets easily? Would you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I did it when I was
Yeah.
15,
No.
going to see
Yep.
the Who or
Yep. You
whatever.
you can do it. It's just certainly much easier now.
And the way it was just as easy then. It's because what we are accustomed to.
Right.
So if we somehow stayed in the loop when Echo and the Bunnymen were playing in Seattle in 1986, and we wanted to go see them from Walla Walla, we somehow found out, got tickets, and there we were, 2 months later. So everything still worked at the end of the day. Um, but granted, to your point, yeah, it wasn't as convenient, and